Hello everyone, and welcome to the Biblical Bookworm. My name is Elizabeth, and today I'll be talking about the book Why We're Catholic, Our Reasons for Faith, Hope, and Love, which was published in 2017 by Trent Horn, who is a Catholic apologist, and in specific he's a staff apologist at Catholic Answers, and he has a YouTube channel called The Council of Trent, which is the most fitting name for a YouTube channel I know. I really like his videos, especially for his meekness, and I really appreciate that he argues very rationally and doesn't offend anyone, at least not on purpose. In his book, Why We're Catholic, he answers why Catholics believe certain things. Like, for example, why we aren't Bible-only Christians, why we believe in purgatory, why we honor Mary, why we believe in spite of scandal, why we protect life, and why we cherish our sexuality. So in this video, I will summarize his answers to the questions I found most interesting. One of the first questions Mr. Horn tackles in his book is the question why we believe in God, and here he first explains the difference between subjective and objective truth. So the difference is subjective truth is only true for the person who says it, and objective truth is true for everyone. So for example, which ice cream tastes best is a subjective truth, because some people prefer vanilla and others chocolate and so on. But the question what medicine to take to cure a specific disease is an objective truth. So if you went to multiple doctors and asked that same question, the answer should ideally be the same. The author also describes a conversation he once had with an atheist where he asked him what would convince him, so what would convince that atheist that God exists. And the atheist said that, for example, an amputated limb growing back would convince him of God's existence. The problem with this reasoning is that if the limb coming into existence out of nothing is impressive for the atheist, then the whole universe coming out of nothing should be even more impressive. If you're interested in other arguments for God's existence, I summarized the book Stealing from God and The Case for Christ, and they are pretty similar to what Trent Horn writes content-wise. The author also talks about the relationship between faith and science, and he says that the two don't contradict each other, but they describe different things. For example, science can show us what the world is, but not what the world ought to be. And so he writes that the fact that God's existence can't be proven scientifically does not mean that there is no God, and he uses the analogy of a metal detector which can't detect diamonds. Just because a metal detector can't detect those diamonds doesn't mean diamonds don't exist. The metal detector is just only able to find metal. Mr. Horn says that there is no scientific experiment that proves that the only reliable form of knowledge is science, and we can't even be sure whether science is the best form of knowledge because although science gave us airplanes and medicine, it also gave us atomic bombs. The reason the Catholic Church only teaches about matters of faith or morals is because science is constantly changing and evolving. When people say science contradicts faith, they usually define faith as believing without evidence or believing in spite of whatever the evidence may say. Science may contradict that definition of faith, but not the traditional understanding of faith, which is that faith is trust. So for example, right before jumping from a plane with a parachute, you'll most likely be nervous, even if there's the evidence that 99.9% of all parachute jumps happen safely, you still will need a leap of faith. Mr. Horn also made the statement that science doesn't produce atheists, but that they are just more likely to pursue careers in science. So overall, it's important to view science and faith not as contradictory, but as complementary. The next question I'd like to tackle is why we believe in the Trinity, and to understand that, the author writes that we have to distinguish between a being, a person, and a nature. A being is an existing entity, or that something exists. A person is a rational creature, or who someone is, and a nature is what something is. Christians believe that there is one being with three persons, and the fact that a being like this can exist becomes apparent when we realize that there are beings with one person, like angels and humans, and beings with no persons, like trees or rocks. Another line of reasoning the author presents is that if the son of a dog is a dog, and the son of a human is a human, then the son of God must be God, and as there is only one God, he must exist as more than one person. Mr. Horn addresses the objection, how could Jesus die if he was God? And he explains that dying doesn't mean to go out of existence, but it means that the parts of a living being are set apart or decompose. So God never went out of existence, but his soul and body were separated. The next question I'd like to summarize is why we're not Bible-only Christians. So first, the Bible doesn't say anywhere that we should be Bible-only Christians or that we should practice sola scriptura or something similar. Also, the first Christians didn't learn from the Bible because the New Testament hadn't been written yet, so they must have learned from tradition. And here it's important to understand that sacred tradition is not the same as customs or tradition with a lowercase t. Because sacred tradition doesn't change like customs do, only our understanding of that tradition grows over time. Then Mr. Horn also mentions that the canon of scripture was declared by the Catholic Church, and so if someone rejects the authority of the Catholic Church, how is this person so sure about what books belong in the Bible? He also addresses the fact that some people claim that it's obvious what books belong in the Bible, but the author argues against that, as for example, the third letter of John doesn't even mention the word Jesus Christ, while other books which are not part of the canon of scripture appear to be more related to Jesus. Trent Horn treats the question why we believe in spite of scandal, and he explains that the church is not a hotel for saints, but a hospital for sinners. The issue is not whether the patients or even the staff are sinners, but whether the church has the cure for sin. The fact that child abuse is such a scandal shows that there is an objective moral law which should lead people away from atheism, not towards it. And he also addresses the proposition some people make that allowing priests to marry would lead to less sexual abuse in the church. But he responds to that saying that many pedophiles are married men, and being single doesn't cause someone to be attracted to children. In another chapter, he talks about why Catholics pray to the saints and why we honor Mary. And first, he makes a distinction between worship and prayer. Worship is giving someone their due honor, and prayer is just making a request. And he says that in Old English, someone might have said, "I pray you will join us for dinner," and that person would have just meant an invitation and was not worshiping the guest or something like that. And regarding Mary, he writes that the more he read scripture, the more he realized that Mary didn't take people away from Christ, but that she actually led people to him. The most important title the Church gives Mary also explains why she matters so much to Catholics. That title is Mother of God, so we honor Mary because she is the Mother of God. There's also a chapter on the question why we protect life, and I'd just like to summarize a few key points Mr. Horn makes. He said that killing a fetus is not killing potential, but it's killing a person with great potential. And he explains that financial reasons aren't an excuse for abortion because it wouldn't be okay to kill a born child in order to create resources and save money. It all boils down to the question what a person is, which I personally find to be way more interesting than the currently debated question what a woman is. So you can't define a person by saying that it's someone who is able to think or feel, because newborns or certain disabled people would fail that test. He also objects to the statement that we shouldn't impose our morality on others because that's actually happening all the time, as by punishing theft or child abuse, we propose a morality. And lastly, a few summarizing words on his chapter, Why We Cherish Sexuality. So first he writes that the church is not obsessed with sex, society is, and the church is simply counteracting. Mr. Horn explains that sex can never be objectively meaningless, and he names a few examples. So for example, we're shocked when people tell us that they have slept with thousands of people, but we're not shocked when an Uber driver tells us that he drove thousands of people in his car. Also, certain gestures have certain meanings. So a handshake, for example, says nice to meet you. A hug says I care for you. And sex says I want to give my whole self and want to be one with you for the rest of my life. Now let's get to my opinion on the book. I would give the book a 9 out of 10, and what I liked about the book was that it was so concise, because Mr. Horn actually tackled, I think, 25 questions or something like that on 200 pages. And so I think that the book is a good reference for people who often engage in debates with Protestants or atheists, because the book just explains many questions that I think we're often dealing with. The reason the rating wasn't higher was just because I was already familiar with most of the content in the book, so it wasn't that much new information for me. But other than that, I can definitely recommend this book. That's been it for today. I hope you liked the video. See you next week. God bless and bye!